Welcome to Section 420, Talkin Yankees. The 2020 baseball season marks the 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues. So who better to have on than the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri, Mr. Bob Kendrick. Hi, Bob. Thanks for coming to the show. It's an honor to have you.
Man, it's my pleasure, James. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, great. And again, people can follow you on NLBM Prez with a Z on Twitter, as well as check out
Instagram.
And Instagram as well.
And same username on Instagram as well.
So it's the same thing on Instagram?
Yep.
Gotcha. And of course, they could check out the website of the museum, nlbm.com. Now, have you been able to reopen your doors?
We've been open now for a month. We've been
great.
Back open. So we opened June 16th. And so we're excited, man, to at least, even within the limited capacity guidelines that we're operating under as a result of the COVID situation that everybody's dealing with, it's still been great to have life back in the museum. People are coming out, everybody's adhering to the guidelines and protocols that we're having to operate under. But it's business, maybe not business as usual, but it's business again.
No, definitely. And it's just, the way baseball is back, it's just good to see the museums and the places like this open up just so, people can come experience and enjoy it. And again, located in Kansas City, Missouri. So we'll get into some of the history of Negro League baseball, but also just want to ask you just about yourself personally. Like, how did you get started with the museum? And, just kind of maybe take us through your journey.
Well, it's an improbable journey in its own right, because I started as a volunteer with the museum back in 1993. Who knew? Yeah, who knew that you would go from being a volunteer to trying to lead this great institution? So for me now, 27 years of affiliation with this museum, as I mentioned, starting as a volunteer in 1993 and becoming the museum's first full-time director of marketing in 1998. I served in that role for nearly 12 years. When I left the museum in 2010, I left as vice president of marketing. And then 13 months later, I came back to become president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. So I'm now in my 9th year as president of this organization. But again, it started as a volunteer. And when I began my involvement, the interesting thing about it, James, is that I considered myself to be a baseball fan. And yet there was this entire chapter of baseball and American history that I really did not know. Now, I knew the names Satchel Paige and Cool Papa Bell and Josh Gibson. Those names transcended mainstreamly. Most baseball fans have at least heard those names, even if they don't know how great these players really were. They've heard those names. But man, I had no idea about the breadth, the depth, the scope, the magnitude of what this history represented both on and off the field. And to be honest, I became almost engrossed in it. I wanted to learn as much as I could. And then I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody else to feel that same way about this as I did. And that kind of got me engaged. And then I started to meet the players. And I met Monty Irvin and Minnie Minoso and Ernie Banks. And of course, my dear friend, the late, great John Buck O'Neill, the founder of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And as I've said on many occasions, once you're bitten by the Buck bug, it's a wrap. You just wanted to be on Buck's team, man. And the charisma and the energy and the passion that he had for this history and to build a museum where they wouldn't be forgotten.
That's an amazing story. And again, congratulations of, starting as a volunteer and now the president running the place. So I'm sure there's probably a ton of great moments, memories, and stuff like that, but maybe can you give us like your top 2 or 3 moments, just, working there, being there, you were like, wow, this is tremendous. Like, just your best memories of this being there.
My favorite memory, and you're right, there have been so many milestone occasions at this museum, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. So while we're celebrating, of course, the 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues, this is the museum's 30th anniversary as an institution. But my favorite memory for me, and this is personal as much as it is professional, that was touring my childhood idol, Henry Aaron. Henry Aaron is my all-time favorite baseball player. And my childhood idol as a kid growing up in Georgia, I idolized the Hammer. And I was almost 12 when he broke Ruth's record. And I remember like it was yesterday, you know, as he was circling the bases in Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. I'm in my parents' home in Little Crawfordville, Georgia, 80 miles away, and I'm circling the bases in my mother's living room, right along with my childhood idol. The old sofa was first base. She had an old TV that was second base, and another old couch that was on the other side of the room that was third base, and her recliner was home plate. And as my childhood idol was touching them all, I was touching them all too. Well, in 1994, baseball is celebrating the 25th anniversary of Mr. Aaron breaking Ruth's record. And as you know, you know the story, his chase for Ruth's record was very challenging, very difficult socially. I mean, his family is in hiding. He's getting death threats. This is 1974. And he doesn't know if he's going to make it around the bases. And so it took him literally 25 years before he was really able to celebrate an accomplishment that many believe to be the greatest sports accomplishment ever. And that was the breaking of Ruth's record. But the thought of this black man and this black man in the South about to break this, you know, this hollowed figure, as you well know, as in the annals of Yankee history, it didn't sit well with a lot of people. And so 25 years later, he finally gets to exhale. And so the Kansas City Royals were part of the celebration as he was going around to Major League ballparks across the country. So they arranged for him to take a tour of the Negro Leagues Museum, his first tour of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Well, old Buck was out of town. So guess who drew the assignment of touring Henry Aaron? Me. And I'll tell you this, James, it's the only time, it's the first and only time that I've ever been starstruck. So Henry Aaron and his wife, Billy, and myself, and we're walking through the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And I'm sharing stories with him about a piece of history that he was a part of. But he comes almost at the tail end of the Negro Leagues. So this was relatively new to him. And then we get to an area where he's featured. And there's this very young kid standing at the train station in Mobile, Alabama, 18 years old, likely leaving home for the very first time to go join the Indianapolis Clowns. And when Henry Aaron left to go join the Indianapolis Clowns, he was a skinny, cross-handed hitting infielder. And so Henry Aaron was a right-hand hitter who was hitting with his left hand on top. That's unorthodox. The fear is that you break your wrist hitting in that manner. Well, Henry Aaron is knocking the cover off the baseball in a highly unorthodox fashion. When it gets to the Clowns, they put the right hand on top, and the rest, as they say, is history. He was shortly after discovered by the Boston Braves, who would become the Milwaukee Braves, who of course would become the Atlanta Braves. Henry Aaron will go down in this sport as one of his all-time greatest players. But his roots began in the Negro Leagues, 1952, with the Indianapolis Clowns.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. And, you know, Hank Aaron, the thing about him, like, he was just consistent his whole career. Like, he's played like 24 years about, and just, you know, I don't think he was ever hurt, and just consistently put up the same great numbers, hit home runs, even, you know, well, late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah.
Probably one of the most complete type of careers you can have.
Absolutely. And I tell people all the time, and you've probably seen this stat float around out there, you take away all 755 home runs, and the man still has over 3,000 hits. His RBI record will likely never be broken. I'm not sure people will play long enough to break his RBI record. You know, and so his total base numbers and all these things, you're right. He was an absolute pillar of consistency.
Now, as we know, 2020 has been a rough year for a lot of different reasons, but one of the positives, it marks the 100-year anniversary of the Negro Leagues as we know it today. I mean, can you actually just give us maybe just a quick this intro, like how it really got started and like the importance of someone like Rube Foster starting the league and kind of how it, you know, took its birth?
Yeah, the leagues were formed officially February 13, 1920. in a meeting that took place here in Kansas City at the Paseo YMCA. The building, James, is literally just right around the corner from where the museum operates. We actually own that historic landmark with plans to convert it into an education and research center in memory of the late, great Buck O'Neil. But that is where Rube Foster led a contingent of 8 independent Black baseball team owners into a meeting there at the Paseo YMCA. Out of that meeting came the birth of the Negro National League, the first successful organized Black baseball league. The Negro Leagues would then go on to operate amazingly for 40 years, from 1920 until 1960. And of course, these leagues would give the best Black and Hispanic athletes an opportunity to showcase their world-class baseball abilities, after they had been shunned from the major leagues. So they created their own league. But these leagues would not only change the game of baseball, more importantly, they would change our country for the better.
In terms of putting the league together, in terms of the finances, like I know, like obviously these days they have like contracts for players, but like how were the players paid back then? Was it based on year or weekly or per game?
No, they were getting a monthly rate. I'm sure most of them would tell you they didn't get paid very much, but they were still getting paid to play the game that they love. They were still able to make a living playing the game that they were so passionate about. And they didn't make as much money as their white major league counterparts, although the superstar Negro leaguers, the Satchel Pages, the Cool Papa Bells, the Josh Gibsons of the world, could make a great living, but they would play this game year round. They could actually earn more money going to many of those Spanish-speaking countries when they were playing winter ball than they actually were in the Negro Leagues. So they weren't making as much as their white counterparts, but they were still making more money than the average working professional in this country. And they were still some of the biggest stars on the face of the planet. They were just big stars in their own community. And so, yeah, they were afforded an opportunity to make a living playing this game.
Now, and with that in mind, there was that term called barnstorming, where they would have like the stars maybe travel around.
Yes.
I mean, did that something they just like independently just do separate from the Negro Leagues, or was that sort of baked into it?
It was a little bit of both, because as they were playing league games, they might be traveling. Say, for instance, the Monarchs and the Chicago American Giants, they may be drawing to St. Louis for a league game. Well, they might stop 2-3 times before they got to St. Louis and play a barnstorming game against local town teams, and they could earn some extra money. And then there was just this barnstorming phenomena in general, which the Negro Leaguers were heralded barnstormers. The major leagues didn't do nearly as much barnstorming as the Negro Leagues did, which actually gave so many people across this country an opportunity to experience Black baseball. So the Negro Leaguers would take baseball into Canada. They were oftentimes the first Americans to play in many Spanish-speaking countries. Believe it or not, James, it was a touring team of Negro Leaguers that introduced professional baseball to the Japanese going all the way back to 1927. So this game, which is a global game, it is a global game today. There are so many ethnicities that make up a major league roster today, but it's really a global game in large part due to the Negro Leagues. They helped make the game the global game that it is today. Now, they never got credit for it, but that's the real deal. Yeah, and so the barnstorming phenomena, you hear Satchel Paige talk about the fact that he enjoyed barnstorming even more than he did competing in the league games, because he got to see so many places. And when he was out there on the road barnstorming, man, the entire towns would shut down to watch the old man do his thing. Yeah, and so he could be free. He could be his natural self in a lot of these efforts, these areas where, sometimes the leagues were a little bit more restraining. Major League Baseball was even more restraining. So he couldn't be his natural self when he gets to Cleveland in 1948. He had to kind of adhere to the way that they did things and not the way that Satchel would have necessarily done them.
Then also Satchel, as well as Bob Fellow, is for the, white major leagues, organize these kind of exhibition games as well, and kind of like,
Yes, epic barnstorming tours between either Negro League teams or Negro League All-Star teams versus Major League teams or Major League All-Star teams. And one of the tours that you just referenced, was one between Satchel and Bobby Feller, 1946. They go from East Coast to West Coast after the World Series because Judge Landis, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who was the commissioner, he started outlawing these games happening prior to the World Series because they were outdrawing the World Series. But you got to remember, man, this is the creme de la creme. You got the best of the best on both squads. And so this was a phenomenon. And so Fella actually leases a plane for Satchel. So Satchel has his Satchel Paige All-Stars, got this old raggedy plane. Fella's got the same old plane. He got his Bobby Feller All-Stars. And they go from East Coast to West Coast for 17 days of work in 1946. Buck O'Neil said each of them could earn $7,000 apiece. James, he says he was making so much money, his wife thought he was stealing. and so, and so, matter of fact, it is my understanding that the Boston Red Sox paid Ted Williams $5,000 not to go on the tour because they thought the old plane was going to crash and they didn't want to lose their superstar.
Just speaking of some of those old players, even like Joe DiMaggio's quote is say this Satchel Paige's fastball is probably the best he's ever seen, out there. And it's just kind of a shame that, as great as his legacy and everything is, he just wasn't really given the shot, at least in the major leagues, until, he was like 47 years old. But again, you're probably talking about pound for pound, probably the greatest pitcher ever.
I think so. Now, again, that doesn't diminish the other guys. And there may be guys who were as good as Satchel. But I can tell you now, there was no one better than Satchel Paige. Satchel had the entire package. He had the longevity. We don't know how old he really was. Baseball says he was 42 when he joined the Cleveland Indians in 1948, but most believe that he was at least 10 years older than what he claimed to. And so he had the longevity. By his estimation, pitched in over 2,600 games. Yeah, the great stuff. Recorded some 55 no-hitters and only God knows how many strikeouts. And the charisma. He could sell it. As I mentioned, he'd ride in the towns. The entire towns were shut down. Everybody wanted to see the old man pitch. So when you look at that combination, longevity, stuff, charisma, there'll never be another Leroy Satchel Paige. No,
Now, in addition to you being president of the facility, you have a project coming up in August. You're partnering with Pro Athletic Inc. It's 22 stories and 22 weeks of Negro League baseball narrated by yourself. Can you just give us a little preview of what that is actually, and when does it start, and where can people see it?
Yeah, you're right. It's coming up in August, and I tip my cap to my friends over at Pro Athlete and their family of brands who came up with this idea that they thought it would be cool to sit me down and turn on the videotape and just let me start running my mouth, and then they would do some things and put them together and create these little vignettes and for a series that they call Storied. I enjoy telling these stories, and many of the stories that I share are stories that I heard firsthand from the likes of Buck O'Neil and my dear friend, the late, great Monty Irvin, and Minnie Minoso and Ernie Banks and all these guys that I've gotten to meet through the years. And so it's a joy for me to be able to keep those stories alive. And honestly, James, I hope these stories never die.
So will it be posted on their website, or is it a special area where people can, find these?
Yes. And we'll have several different ways in which we'll release this digital content. And I'm sure through all of our social media channels, we'll be able to connect with people to let them know where they can see these. But no, it was fun. We actually sat down and we reeled off 22 stories or 22 plus stories in about 3 hours. And so
pretty quick.
Yeah, man, I was running my mouth. That's what I do.
And I mean, did you come up with the idea, or did someone suggest it?
No, it was actually the idea of the CEO of Pro Athlete, Andrew Dowis, who he's really been engaged here a lot recently with the museum, and was so moved. I did a presentation for him and his crew, his team. And we talked about Negro Leagues history, and we talked again about this museum, both for the work that it does to preserve this history, but also as a social justice museum and a civil rights museum. And I think he was so struck by the conversation that we had with his team that day that it got him thinking about other things that his organization could do to support the museum. And so this was his brainchild to get with me and sit me down and just have me share some of these stories and put them together for digital content. And so, you know, like I said, I tip my cap to him and all of his folks over at Pro Athlete for coming up with this idea and for giving me a platform to share this history with others. And, you know, you never know when you might draw and create a new fan or, and for, as it relates to this museum, a new supporter. And so the more we can get this history out, opportunities like I'm having to sit down with you and to share this, you know, a little bit about the history of this museum and the history of the Negro Leagues in general, it just expands the base. And when you can do that, you never know where your next donor is going to come from. And we need to create as many friends as we possibly can to keep this great museum going.
No, and I'm sure it's going to last a long legacy. So we're about in the ninth inning here. So I know we mentioned Satchel Paige, of course, you know, Hank Aaron, you know, there's Josh Gibson, but I mean, you know, there's probably so many, but there are like 2 or 3 other players that really most baseball fans haven't heard of, but really should know the name of.
Yes, yeah, there are a couple who come to mind immediately for me. One is the great Cuban player, Martin Dihigo, nicknamed him El Maestro, the master, because he could do it all. Played all 9 positions, played all 9 of them well. He is the only baseball player in the history of our sport to be enshrined into 5 different countries' baseball halls of fame. He's in the Mexican, Cuban, Venezuelan, Dominican, and in Cooperstown. Yeah, 1 year in the Mexican League, James, Dihigo wins the pitching title. He goes 19-2 with an 0.90 ERA. Oh, it gets better. The sucker hits 387 that same season and won the batting title. Man, that makes no sense. And yet he is not a household name. Now, you can't come out of Cuba and not know that name, but most baseball fans have not heard the name Martin Dihigo. Yeah, El Immortal, El Maestro, but you should. Mm-hmm. And then for me, the other guy is the great Oscar Charleston. Oscar Charleston, my friend Buck O'Neill would say without hesitation, the greatest baseball player he ever saw. Now, he thought Willie Mays to be the greatest major leaguer. And most people concur because Mays could beat you every way in which you could be beaten. He could beat you with his bat. He could beat you with his arm, with his legs, with his glove. And of course, Mays' illustrious career began in the Negro Leagues with the Birmingham Black Barons. But Buck O'Neill believed that Oscar Charleston to be the greatest baseball player he ever saw. Oscar Charleston was an early era Negro leaguer who could flat out do it all. The consummate 5-tool guy. Hit for power, hit for average, could field, could run, could throw. In 1921, he led the Negro Leagues in home runs, triples, doubles, stolen bases, and batting average in the same season. If you were going to compare him to a major league contemporary, he had the defensive abilities of Tris Speaker, the tenacity of Ty Cobb, and the bat of Babe Ruth rolled into one dynamic package. And old Buck says he never saw a center fielder who could go back on a ball the way Charleston could. Had uncanny instincts, just seemed to always know where that ball was coming down right off the crack of the bat. So he played a very shallow center field. So you couldn't bloop it in front of him, and unless you hit it on a rope, you couldn't get it over his head. You remember the great catch that Willie Mays makes in the World Series? And most fans have seen video of that great over-the-shoulder basket catch there in the Polo Grounds, where that play he could have only made that catch in the Polo Grounds. That's a home run in virtually every other Major League ballpark. But quite frankly, the throw was actually better than the catch. But everybody remembers the catch because he ran a country mile to make that great over-the-shoulder basket catch. Well, James, all the old timers in the Negro League say, had that been Oscar Charleston, he'd have been waiting for that ball to come down.
Kind Kind of reminds me a little bit of Andrew Jones. Is from the Atlanta Braves. Kind of way he used to play shallow center, but he used to be able to guard their flag.
Oh, you could go back on it, man. Absolutely.
Well, again, thank you for mentioning those two plays, and people should obviously read up on them more. Now, just just before we leave, so let's say someone that and now you need to get out there at some point, visits the museum. Like, what's like the message? What should people take away once they they visit the museum and walk out? Like, what's the message or what should they feel as they're leaving?
It's so special. It's so special. And let me put this disclaimer up right now. For those of you who might venture and make your way out to Kansas City, and if you come here and you think that you're going to witness a sad, somber story, nah, you got the wrong place. This is a celebration, and we treat it as such. It is the celebration of the power of the human spirit to persevere and prevail. And so what you witness when you come to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, you're going to meet some of the greatest baseball players to ever put on a baseball uniform. But by the time you walk away from this experience, I think you walk away with a deeper, richer appreciation for just how great this country really is. Because the story of the Negro Leagues could have only happened in America. So again, yeah, it's anchored in the ugliness of American segregation, a horrible chapter in this country's history. But out of segregation rose this wonderful story of triumph and conquest. And James, is all based on one small, simple principle. You won't let me play with you, then I'll create a league of my own. And when you stop to think about that, that is the American way. And so while America was trying to prevent them from sharing in the joys of her so-called national pastime, it was the American spirit that allowed them to persevere and prevail. And that story comes to life in triumphant and winning fashion here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Well, it's been excellent, just speaking with you. And again, follow you on Twitter as well as Instagram. Again, NLBM Prez. Get all the updates, what's going on at the museum. Thank you, Bob, once again, just for coming on. Such an honor. But before we leave, I'll see. Now, I got a Yankee cap here, but for 100 years of the Negro League anniversary, I just want to tip my cap.
Hey, man, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for the opportunity to be on the show and for helping us keep alive the legacy of the Negro Leagues.